What's up, guys? Last DayZ Mods here with another tutorial video. I know it's been quite a while, but hey, life happens, and yeah, busy, busy, busy. So I wanted to um, kind of address an area that I think is going to be really helpful if you're trying to boost the loot on your server, and I really think that this is probably one of the most common mistakes people make when they go to boost their server is not understanding this, first of all, this file and this, I guess we'll call it a principle, because really you kind of have to, if you want to, really boost the loot. I'm not talking about if you want to increase your M4s from, 10 to 20. But you see a lot of heavily modded servers out there where the loot is really boosted. You run into a building, there's loot all over the floor, and maybe you've tried to boost the loot on your server. You have like cranked it up to 200 M4s, and you're like, what is going on? Why am I not finding M4s everywhere? Or whatever. Well, chances are, if that is happening and your loot is still spawning in, but you're just not seeing it like all over in the buildings, you're just maybe still seeing it in smaller amounts, but every gun you see is now an M4. Chances are you're missing this step, and it's a very crucial step, but it's also unbelievably tedious. And so maybe there's a faster way. If there is, I haven't found it, and I would love to hear about it if you know of one. But here we go. We're going to dive into the file we're going to be looking at and messing with today. And I've got a surprise for you here at the end, so stick with me. The file we're going to be looking at is this one here, map group pro2, this file right here. And so what this file is it's basically, I mean, not basically, it is every building in the game, and it is basically all of these lines here. I'm going to try to break this down simply and not use technical terms and get all lofty with it. Basically, every one of these spots here is a coordinate. Now, I'm not going to take the time to explain what each of these is because, again, I'm just trying to keep this very simple so that if you want to boost the loot on your server, you can watch this video and you can do that, okay? So every one of these entries where it says point POS, which means point position, is a potential spot within that building that an item of loot can spawn. So hopefully that makes that very simple for you. So for instance, land shed M1. This is one of the small little sheds that you'll find around houses. There are 3 possible spots where loot could spawn in that shed. Okay, so we'll go into something a little bit more common. Let's go to the ATC. So, so everybody knows the ATC, the Northwest Airfield. Oh, there we go. Land Airfield ATC big. So you'll see here, so these are the point positions where loot could potentially spawn. And you'll see, and so it breaks it down as well in sections. So each of these says container name. So that's going to be where at in the building. Okay, so loot floor, that's pretty self-explanatory. Loot that you will find on the floor. So that's the container name here. Now look here, there is a lot of entries just there on the floor. Okay, a lot of them. The next container that we're going to look at is shelves. So if you're running around, you see items on the shelf. You'll see here there is also a lot of entries there. Next one is loot weapons. So that's going to be the weapons that are specifically labeled weapon that can spawn, and you'll see there is a ton of entries here. So let's break this down. So this is the vanilla version of the file. So we have, I'm not going to take the time to count them, but we have a lot of entries here. Notice that right here, loot max, right? Loot max. This is the entry we're going to be dealing with a lot here. There's only 15. Okay, and then we look here at the shelves, only 15. And then if we look here at the floor, only 15. And then up here on the top, loot max, 20. Okay, so what that means is that a maximum, and for the vanilla version, a maximum of 20 items will spawn into this building, maximum. Um, and it's going to pick randomly 20 items from these areas, and 15 of these, it will randomly pick 15. Okay. So it's not going to be the same every time. So that's why sometimes you'll run and you'll find loot in one place, you'll find loot in another. The loot cycles through, you'll run and you'll find it in a different place. Now, obviously, there's 15 in each, there's not 45. So this controls the maximum amount for the building. This controls the maximum amount for each individual area. So maybe, I mean, there's going to be multiple combinations. Maybe 15 items all spawn on the floor at one time, but never more. There will never be more than 15. So what's going to happen is the additional 5 that could potentially spawn in will come from either the shelves or the weapons. So hopefully I've made that simple. I could get a lot more complex with this, but I'm really trying to keep this very, very simple for you. So, what do we need to do? Well, if we want to go in to the ATC and have every possible item of loot spawn that could possibly spawn in that building, this is where you're really going to hate me, but again, I have not come across an easier way to do this. You're going to need to go in and manually count each of these items for each container, okay? So you're going to need to go in and physically count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You get it. You're going to have to count all those up. You're going to have to add that number here. So instead of 15, you'll put however many of these point positions you counted. So you'll put that number there. You'll do that for each of these containers, okay? Each of them. And then you'll add all of those up and you'll put it here at loot max. So for simplicity, I've already done this, so let me show you what that looks like. Okay. Oh, hold on just a moment. Come on, mods, be more prepared. Okay, so I've already done this, and in fact, I guess I was going to save the surprise till the end, but um, here you have it. I have gone through and literally maxed out this entire file so that every item of loot is spawned at max. And I'm going to make it available on my Discord for you to download. Now, I'm going to put some disclaimers on that because you don't want to just load this into your into your game, and I'll explain that as we go. So for now, let's stick with the flow of what we're talking about. So let's type in ATC. There we go, ATC. Okay, so you'll see, I counted these up. So there is 56 possible weapon spawns. So I counted these are 56 entries. I put 56 here. I went through, I counted all those. There are 57 in loot shelves. And then here on the floor, there's 49. Put that into a calculator. Total is 162. So that's the basic idea here is maybe, again, the reason I'm going through this tutorial is maybe you don't want every item boosted, but you want some of your military items boosted. Okay. Or some of your, excuse me, not items, but buildings. So maybe you want, for instance, the ATC to just be stacked with loot. So everybody runs there, fights for all the good loot, so on and so forth. Okay, so before I go any further, I need to explain this. If you're going to do this, you have to have enough items to make it make sense. Otherwise, all of your military items are going to spawn in this building, and because you have not allocated it or boosted your loot enough, there's a potential that all your other buildings are going to be empty, and the game has decided to dump all that military loot in this building. Okay, so if you're going to do this, you really need to boost the loot heavily. Now that can cause some problems. We'll get into that a little bit later. So you have to, there's a lot of balancing here if you're going to do this. But again, here's the other thing. You don't have to max this out. Now I've gone through and I maxed it out. As long as you don't exceed that number, as long as I don't put 172 or whatever, or instead of 49 I put 53, you're never going to get 53 items to spawn here because there's only 42. So what you can do is, maybe you don't want it to be totally overflowing with loot, but you want more than what was there. So what was the vanilla? The vanilla I think was 20. So maybe instead of putting 20, where were we? Yeah, maybe instead of putting 20, you put 40. And down here, you put, instead of 15, you put 30. So now what you've done is double the chances. You don't have to max it out. Okay. I've just done that because I run a server that's 25 times boosted loot. There's loot literally coming out of your ears. I'll explain how that's done in a bit. But you don't have to max it out. You can set that number higher. So the reason I'm showing you this is because, again, maybe you have gone into your types.xml file, and I've got another video that shows how to do that. So if you haven't watched it, go and watch that. So you've gone into your types.xml, you found the guns or whatever that you wanted to boost. You put 100 M4s. You've run all over the map looking for those M4s. You're like, why are they not spawning? Because they're being restricted by these numbers. That's why. So you'll go in and you'll up these numbers in your military buildings or spots where M4s would spawn. So you can find those specific buildings. Any tier 4 buildings or tier 3, like the ATC, you'll probably find M4s there, or some of the Tizzy buildings. You can look up Tizzy. Uh-oh, I don't want to do that. Whoops, that was a bad idea. There we go. So you can look up Tizzy, and there's going to be there's going to be some buildings. Did I not spell that right? Okay, there we go. So Tizzy Barracks. So maybe you want to boost these and go down specifically to weapons and double the weapons, and then double that top number for max. So that means you're going to have a high likelihood that all those M4s that you have boosted in your types will now spawn there in your Tizzy Barracks. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully it helps you understand if you're going to boost your loot heavily. Now, the biggest mistake I see people make, like I remember a couple of years back, there was a guy that was trying to boost the nails in his server, and he kept boosting the number, but there were no more nails showing up. And it's like, what the heck? And he was getting really frustrated. He's like, man, I doubled that number, and then the players kept saying it wasn't showing up. So I doubled the number again. So what he was doing is he was just going into his types and he's just doubling that number and not seeing it. Well, that's because there was nowhere for those nails that he was typing in types. There was nowhere for them to go, nowhere for them to spawn in. So what you're doing here is you're creating additional places on the map that loot you're boosting can spawn in. Okay, so that's the simplest way I could put it. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Again, you don't have to go in and boost all of these. You can pick maybe just certain buildings you want to boost. It's going to take a very, very, very long time to go through. This took me 2 days, not 2 days straight, but 2 days to go through and do this. I did this years ago for, I think it was when the 1.12 update come out. It's been a while, so I went through. This is the newest version out right now at the time of this video, 1.18. So I've gone through and I've done it again. Okay, now let's get into something else here. This is important. So you're going to find some of these buildings that they don't have this entry, loot max 2 or loot max whatever. You're going to find some that are just blank. Let me see if I can find one now that I've said that. Here we go. Okay, so land shed W6. So you'll see container name, loot floor, loot max 6. But then up here at the top, where there should be a loot max, there's nothing. Does that mean no loot spawns in? No, it doesn't, but it means that it's controlled by this number up here as well as these numbers down here. Where did that one go? These numbers down here. What you have to do if you come across a building that you want to control it, and really customize the loot is you have to actually type that line in. So we're going to highlight this. We're going to copy it. We're going to make a space. I'll tell you why that's important in a second. Make a space. And we're going to highlight this and paste our loot max. There we go. So now we've just added that line in. That's all we've done. Okay. And obviously, so we'll just keep this very simple. So we're going to count these. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Change both these numbers to 7. And now this, as long as you have boosted your loot enough and there's enough loot to spread around to all of these loot points, there will be more loot spawning into these Landshed W6s. Again, maybe you want all of your items or all of your buildings boosted, but maybe you only want specific ones, so you have to go in and kind of pick and choose which ones. Now, it's extremely important that you put this space here. I didn't think it was, because I thought, well, it's just a line of code. It'll read it whether or not there's a space there. Wrong. I went through and tried to validate this, and every single spot where there was not a space there, it read this as one line and kicked out an error. So make sure there's a space there between that loot max, and make sure you're closing it with these. So be very careful. I mean, if you ever worked with these files, you know one piece of punctuation in the wrong place, or if you don't close a group or close a container with the right punctuation, it'll screw your file up and can potentially mess your game up. So there you have it. You may have to do some editing like so. You might also find that some of the containers here, it'll just say loot 4 and there's no loot max here next to it. Um, you'll have to go in and manually add that if you in fact want to boost that particular building. So hopefully that makes sense. There may be some manually editing in here, but if you're coming across this issue, you've been boosting your loot like crazy and it just doesn't seem to be working, you're not finding that your server has really, like, I mean, there's more loot, but it's not like where you want it. It's probably because you haven't done this or because you're missing this step. So you can go in and do that. Okay, so hopefully that clears that up. I don't think I missed anything. Um, oh, okay. One item is this. I highly recommend you validate this when you're done to make sure you're not making any errors. And in fact, every file, if you're going to run it through a validator, you need to go in, and there is 2 spots on this file where this is located. The Enoch specific, you don't need this line like at all. So just delete it. Okay. Just completely delete it. And that way, because what that's going to do is when you run it through your validator, that will kick out an error and tell you that it's not an error, or that it's an error, and that string is not allowed. So just delete it. Doesn't need to be there. It doesn't serve any purpose. And I think there's another one, yeah, down here above seasonal events. Delete that as well. In fact, I would go in and just first thing get rid of these lines. That way you can run that through a validator and you don't get that error coming back to you. So that's it. You want to boost your loot, but you're having trouble doing it, or maybe you want a really boosted loot server and you want loot coming out of your ears, or maybe you're running a death match and you've got an areas picked out and you want those buildings to spawn max amounts of loot. What you got to do is find those buildings in this file, max out the capacity for those buildings, and then obviously there's some more editing. I've got a whole tutorial on how to do that. But just max out those buildings. Again, I'm not really going to get into usage tags here, but you'll have to adjust those for a death match. But that's it. If you're having an issue where your loot's not coming in as boosted as you want it, and you're wondering why, this is probably the reason, okay? So let's get into the good stuff. What I've done is I have fully maxed this out. I'm going to put a link in the comments here, or not in the comments, but in the title. a link to my Discord where you can actually go in and download this file that I'm looking at right here, right now. And literally every building is maxed out. Now, be very careful with this file. If you're going to use this file, you have to make room. Okay. So the reason I say that and what I mean by that is you can't just max all of your loot. Go in, I've got a Discord bot. You'll see that in my other videos. You can't go in and type 50 times loot, throw this file in, and expect your game to run well. It's going to break your server, guaranteed. So you're going to have to make room for it. I've explained this in one of my other videos, I know, where you're going to have to remove some, what I like to call junk loot, just some of that lower tier stuff that if you're boosting your server, it's loot that you probably don't want anyways. You're boosting it because you want the good military gear. So you're going to have to play with that. You're going to have to balance it, but don't just load this in and I mean, first of all, if you're going to load this in, you have to boost your loot. Otherwise, you're going to find a lot of empty buildings, and then you're going to find some buildings that are just loaded with loot. So you got to balance it, okay? So I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there. The other thing is this is very helpful if you are um, uh, doing like JSON builds. So this will help spread that loot out to that. And so I run a 25 times loot server. It's probably one of the more popular ones. If I'm being honest, it's not my favorite. My favorite is Famine Lands, which is a more hardcore style. But this one, because it's boosted loot, it's easy access to all the gear, and then you can run around in PvP. Um, I run it with this file, and the loot is boosted insanely. Like we've got 300 M4s, like 300 AUGs, and it runs pretty smooth considering. And so you gotta toy around with the balance. So again, this is available. You can download this, throw it into your server, but make sure that you're taking those other steps. Otherwise, it's not going to work quite right for you. So I hope that's helped. I hope it's been informative. I hope that you're able to use this. And again, you don't have to max these out, right? You can, in fact, I'm toying around now with a way to automate this through the bot. Um, where instead of 100 times or 100%, maybe you want it 50% of each building or 25. So I'm going to try to toy around with a function where you can just type in a percentage and it will go through and add that percentage to each of these buildings. So it'll count up all the loot points for you and it will add a percentage of it instead of making it full. Hopefully that makes sense. But anyway, that's down the road. It's in the forecast. Hopefully it's something I can get done. But again, one more time, last DayZ mods. Hope you're having an amazing day and hope this has been beneficial to you. And sorry it's been so long since I put something out, but I hope to catch up with you out on the battlefield of this wonderful game we all enjoy. And please like, subscribe, all that stuff that we ask for. And again, feel free to reach out to me on my Discord if you have any questions or if you tried this and it's not working or running into errors. Let me know. I'll try to make some time for you and see what I can do to help. Thanks so much, guys, and catch you on the next one.